I'm sure you know why we're here, but I would just like to say that some of you probably know that at exactly the same time, in another part of the town, our president, the one who's looking over our shoulders there on the wall, is interviewing Tom Stoppard. Did you know that?
Yeah, I mean, is this working?
I just, while I have tremendous respect for both Tom Stoppard and our president, I dare say that he would benefit more from an exchange of ideas with the author we're going to meet tonight. Ladies and gentlemen.
Is it working? Yeah, good, it's working again. Yeah. Yeah, I mean...
Ladies and gentlemen, the author of Accelerando and Merchant Princes, Mr. Charles Stross.
Hang on.
I think my microphone has just decided to censor me.
We're going to have to share.
Yeah, I suspect its battery is dying, so we'll share this one.
You wanted to say something about Tom Stoppard and our president?
It sort of slipped my mind, but you know, way to convince me that I'm not number one.
Sorry about that. Let's start with Merchant Princes. 6 novels in, it still reads like an introduction to something unfathomably grander. Did you know how the saga was going to end when you started writing it, and how long will the series be?
The answer is yes and no. To understand why, I need to rewind to 2002 when I was young, hungry, had lost my main job and had just sold my first 2 novels to Ace. And I had a literary agent, and she's American, and I love her, she handles the business side of things for me. And she said to me, Charlie, you've just handed in 2 novels to a science fiction publisher in America, and your contract says they have the right of first refusal on your next novel. But they're not even going to look at a 3rd novel from you until at least the first one is in print, which isn't going to be for a couple of years. So, you can't sell any more science fiction novels. Why don't you write a big fat fantasy or alternate history series I can sell for lots of money? When you've just lost your job, this seems like a really good idea. So I set out to cold-bloodedly design a series, and I came up after a couple of false starts with this proposal for 4 books. And they were going to average 800 pages each. Unfortunately, well, I wrote the first 600-page doorstep, and we sent it off, and in the end, Tor bought it, the American publisher. I was young and naive and didn't understand the economics of binding and printing costs in the United States. If your book is going to come in at more than 426 pages, it gets fat, and it gets too fat for most of the binding companies in America to handle in hardback. So they have a far more limited number of companies they can go to, which makes a book actually cost 50% more to print and bind by just going over by 1 page. Did I say a 600-page book? So my editor had a great idea for how to deal with this. It was, let's chop the book in half because we can sell 2 300-page books instead. So what was the first book in a series actually became the first 2 books in a series. I was about 150 pages into the 850-page second book of the 4-book series when I got the word you're only allowed 300 pages per book. And when you add...
Not 426.
Yeah. And exactly, they wanted lots of thin books they could sell rather than a smaller number of big fat books. And you know, if I'd been thinking about earning a living cold-bloodedly from the beginning, I'd have gone with that, but it disrupted my flow, and so the second book came out as 4 volumes. We've just finished reassembling them for the British release, which got delayed by several years, as 3 fat books. Also, they were sold as fantasy, they're really sort of science fiction in fantasy drag. We finally got the contractual arrangement with my other publisher changed to allow me to sell them as science fiction or whatever the hell I wanted. So they're now being sold as techno thrillers, effectively, in the UK. So this is sort of more stuff about the greasy nuts and bolts of how the business works than you really wanted to know.
Thank you anyway.
Yeah, as I said, it was originally going to be a 4-book series. As it is, a series of 6 books that you see are the first 2 in the original outline. I'm now working on the 3rd, which is going to come out as 3 slim books again. Actually, it's a Neil Stevenson doorstop with 2 dotted lines down the spine saying "cut here." And by the time I get through that one, it will have diverged so far from the original series proposal that I might as well throw it away.
Thank you. You don't shy away from nuclear topics, and I don't mean just atomic weapons. You have strong opinions on all sorts of charged political issues. Feminism, racism, anti-Semitism, multiculturalism, marriage equality. How do you deal with all the hate? Don't you get stressed or frustrated by the trolls?
There's surprisingly little of it, actually. I've had, I think, 2 emails from Americans saying, "Why do you hate America?" Because of the ending of the 6th book of The Merchant Princes, which... Should I spoiler it?
Show of hands, please.
Let's just say George W. Bush is assassinated in 2003 in the White House with stolen nuclear weapons. By the time Dick Cheney has had a terminal heart attack and we're into President Donald Rumsfeld, things are going downhill badly. And I'm not going to give you away the spoiler of the ending, but there are more than 2,000 nuclear explosions. There are survivors, though, otherwise I wouldn't have another series to write.
The economies of developed nations have grown so intertwined that the prospect of an all-out war between states seems less possible by day. Do you agree?
Well, yes, outside the world of the Merchant Princes, it's getting... Well, hang on, that was war between developed nations. I'd be very careful about saying never. That was very much what they were saying in 1913 in Europe, where all the nations ran on a gold standard. You didn't really need a passport to travel through many countries. I mean, you did within the Russian Empire, but in Western Europe you could travel without one. Nobody expected the chain of horrible catastrophic accidents that led to the First World War, but we look to be at a similar period where it's unlikely to happen again. I certainly don't see any probability of a war within the European Union, short of a country seceding from the Union first. On a bigger scale, though, we may well see sort of proxy... Well, a lot of our conflicts are resolved by diplomatic means now. We have a large number of international trade agreements and systems for regulating disputes, but that doesn't mean it's impossible. The biggest problem we've got, I think, is the existence of a military-industrial complex for whom wars mean profit, which inevitably means there's some interplay between ambitious politicians who want to stay on top of the pile, corporations who want to sell new products, and militaries who want to buy new toys, and to justify buying the toys, they need to do something with them.
So you don't think all the future wars will be fought between corporations rather than countries?
I think we're nearing a point at which the countries are getting so pissed off at large-scale corporate tax evasion that the companies are going to suddenly get a very sharp lesson as to who's in charge. There are signs of it already, with the United States and various EU countries talking about multilateral agreements on taxation and the elimination of tax havens. When you discover a company like Amazon is selling 6 billion euros worth of products a year into the UK and paying maybe 10 million euros in tax, because all their sales are registered as coming from a country based in Luxembourg, where they employ about 100 people. There's something flaky going on there, and it's gotten to the point where some of the larger governments, both the American government, British, I believe the French and Germans as well, are summoning executives and grilling them angrily in front of taxation-related committees. The idea that companies are going to actually hire mercenaries and have fights is pretty implausible, especially in the developed world. And I think we're nearing a point at which public and political dissatisfaction with the way they do business and evade taxes is reaching a crisis point. And all it takes is multilateral agreements to wipe out the ability for them to act as if they're above the law.
Can conspiracy theories be considered modern-day folklore with roots in science fiction or fantasy?
Ah, yeah. Well, now we're sort of changing the subject slightly. But yeah, conspiracy theories. I'm a fan of conspiracy theories. I don't necessarily believe them, but there's something very seductive about stories that tie together lots of apparently disconnected facts and seek to explain the whole world. Now, in the real world, conspiracies are difficult to manage. The only kind of conspiracy theory I sort of almost always believe in is one that has an event occurring that is considered undesirable and therefore needs to be covered up. It's quite easy for the true origins of some horrible accident or mess to be swept under the rug by a conspiracy of interests who want to suppress it. Just yesterday, word came out that somebody had uncovered a copy of a report buried above a Brazilian government for 40 years into genocide against the indigenous tribes in the Amazon jungle. 2,000-page report with numerous indictable offences of mass murder and slavery and theft of land, suppressed for 40 years. An entire municipal library being burnt down as cover for this. That's the sort of conspiracy I can believe. People who committed those crimes didn't really want any copies of this report to survive. It's much harder to believe in, say, the Apollo moon landings were a conspiracy. You know, you had 250,000 people working on the project for 10 years. Somebody was going to blab if it was actually all a fake. So I sort of believe in conspiracies to conceal the truth rather than conspiracies to do things proactively. And I guess we get into this from the Merchant Princes, where there's a vast conspiracy running all the way up to the White House dealing with extra-dimensional narco-terrorists and drug smugglers from a parallel universe. Actually, to some extent, that was a side effect of me being forced to write these 300-page books. I was part-way into a long story, but I realised that there was something I needed to fix in an earlier volume, and damn, it's already in print. But left me with only one logical senior criminal, villain within the plot of this conspiracy, and it was a Vice President of the United States. Nobody else would actually be able to do it. Which is why Dick Cheney shows up as a villain in the series. But, that sort of conspiracy is sort of a bit hard to believe in.
Speaking of drug merchants, the European Union's drug agency released a new report a few days ago, and Estonia is still #1. We have surpassed UK and the rest of Europe in drug-induced death statistics. We have twice as many drug deaths per million as does the next one in the graphs. Norway, I think.
Did they say what was killing people?
Well, it's mostly 3-methylfentanyl.
Fentanyl. Oh.
Fentanyl coming in from Russia.
A very strong opiate. A very narrow therapeutic index, which is the gap between it having the dose that has an active effect and the dose that kills you. That would do it. Impure, very strong synthetic opiates.
You've been a harsh critic of the current global drug policy, the war on some drugs, since the beginning, since Yellow Snow at least. Was this attitude shaped by your experiences as a pharmacist?
Yeah. A bit of background. In my youth, I took some really bad career advice and qualified and worked for a couple of years as a pharmacist. It's really bad for a pharmacist to have too much imagination. But along the way, I dealt with supplies for addicts in the community, as one did in those days in the 1980s in the UK. I also studied drugs of addiction while doing a degree in pharmacy. For example, lectures and practical work on marijuana under a professor who was one of the very few people in the UK who was licensed to actually do pharmaceutical research on it. He used to get kilogram sacks of it from the government farm. And the general consensus was that these drugs are not really any more harmful than alcohol or tobacco. This is not to say that they're harmless, nor is it to say that alcohol or tobacco are harmless. It's just that they are not intrinsically more harmful than those other drugs, which are socially acceptable. But the real problem with them is largely a side effect of the conditions under which they're used and distributed, and the engagement of organised crime in their supply. If they were decriminalised, or better still legalised, they could then be controlled medically, and we would have some hope of reducing deaths due to overdoses, and also addressing the problems that drive people to use them in the first place. And the Merchant Princes wasn't primarily an anti-drug war tract, but there's a large chunk of that in there, it informs it.
The more intricate and effective medical interventions and cognitive prostheses get, the higher their price seems to be, at least for now. Do you think the brave future of immortal biotech augmented adventurers will be available only for the very rich, like the scores of superhero movies Hollywood is currently cranking out seem to imply?
My biggest fear, actually, is it's going to be for people who are on the wrong side of the law, because cognitive enhancers are chemicals just like any others. When there's a thriving synthetic narcotics scene, you can certainly envisage people who make ecstasy or LSD or similar drugs trying to make cognitive enhancers.
I meant cognitive prostheses as in technologies.
Okay.
Technologies other than chemical technologies.
No, that's a bit of a difficult one to go for. Stuff that's wired into your brain, I would say, is actually undesirable at this stage, because our electronics are getting better so fast. But if you have a brain implant today, it's going to be obsolete in 2 or 3 years, and you don't want to have brain surgery every 2 years to upgrade your technology. It's much easier to have a smartphone, and
which is effectively also a cognitive prosthesis.
It's a cognitive prosthesis, and it's external to our body, so we can upgrade it easily. I don't think we'll see the implants of science fiction until we're at the far end of Moore's law and progress in electronics has slowed down to snail's crawl. And again, the question is, what are we going to do with it? I mean, we have smartphones today. Who would have predicted 20 years ago we'd all be walking around with these shiny gadgets that are more powerful than the most powerful supercomputer of 1993, that give us access to the sum total of human knowledge. And what most of us do with it is inane chatter or look at captions of cute cats with silly text attached to it. I mean, that just does not make any kind of sense. Actually, you could argue that that's a classic case of the futility of trying to write predictive science fiction about the future. Nobody in their right mind would have imagined what we'd be doing with our smartphones. A science fiction writer might have guessed at the smartphone being plausible. They wouldn't have guessed at what we'd be doing with them.
I think there were authors who would have predicted that we'd use them for porn 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Do you want to speak about Rule 33?
About
your book, Rule 33.
Rule 34.
Sorry, yeah.
Okay, Rule 34 of the internet says, if you can imagine it, there's porn of it. No exceptions. Anything you can imagine, if you search on Google with safe search switched off and add the word porn, you will find porn relating to it. I attempted to break Rule 34 in the process of researching this book, and I cannot unsee what I have now seen. That particular novel was one of a couple I've written. They're very hard novels to write because they're police crime novels, police procedurals, Scottish police procedurals. There's a lot of Scottish crime novels out there for some reason. Scots are a criminal nation. And unlike most Scottish crime novels, I was setting mine in the near future, 10 to 15 years out, trying to deal with crimes that didn't exist yet. Halting State was the first of them, and I think I actually described Google Glass fairly accurately in 2007.
You described Google Glass fairly accurately in 2002.
Okay.
I quote the forward toast. Where will we be in another decade? Imagine a prosthetic memory wired into spectacle frames, recording everything you see and available to prompt you at a whispered command. In a decade, it will be possible for the cost of a home PC, and the decade after that, they'll be giving them away in breakfast cereal packets.
Hey, I got it right. Yeah, and again in Rule 34, I was describing some of the activities of a Scottish police squad whose job is to look at weird porn on the internet and see if it represents criminal activities in their area. I'm glad I got this into print in 2010, was it 2010 or 2011? Because
it's pretty recent.
Yeah, that same year my local police force set up a squad to do pretty much that. And one of the things in that book was the criminal utility of 3D printers, including 3D printed handguns.
Yeah, what were the first three things that went viral that people started to use 3D printers for? Bongs, guns, and dildos.
Yeah, and manufacturing drugs.
We are sort of predictable, aren't we?
Yeah. If you think the worst of human beings, you won't be disappointed.
You've ranted against being labeled as a predictive science fiction author, and you have said that it is not the role of science fiction, and you hope that most of your predictions will not come true. Can you name a prediction that you're glad that has come true?
That has come true?
Yes.
Okay, I'm actually going to stick my neck out and say Google Glass, because I think in the long run, that's actually going to turn out to be a good thing. It depends how it's deployed and who by, but the idea of life logging, of monitoring everything going on around you and being able to search on it, on the one hand it may sound horribly intrusive at first, on the other hand, think what it means to an elderly person with the early stages of Alzheimer's disease and dementia. They will actually be able to have access to a prosthetic memory device. Hell, look at students who fall asleep in lectures. You know, they'll at least have some kind of recording of what they've slept through, if they can be bothered to replay it. Again, we want our police officers to be wearing these devices and having them switched on the whole time and not able to tamper with the recording.
A week ago, Bruce Sterling was here in Estonia, and I read an interview with him where he said something to the effect that it's a toy that's going to be gone and forgotten in 2 or 3 years. But I don't remember his reasoning. He also said, when asked to name the most important contemporary science fiction writers, he plugged you and Bruce Sterling. Cory Doctorow and you. And that's it. Does that surprise you?
I'm not totally sure whether I'm surprised by it, but I disagree. I would say the most important science fiction writers are probably Bruce Sterling and Carl Schrader, who is a not very well-known Canadian futurist by profession and science fiction writer.
Would you agree that white male Anglo-Americans are still the poster boys club of science fiction writers? And would you change it if you could?
I would agree that some sectors of science fiction have an inordinate bias that lowers the barrier to entry for white male, middle-class techie types. I don't think this is actually healthy. One of the things that annoys me is how difficult it is for people of colour, for ethnic minorities, for women, for the disabled, to get traction in publishing. It's not because individual editors, publishers, or booksellers are biased against them, but just there's this sort of received vague floating knowledge that books by minorities or women or whatever in this particular area don't sell as well. And I know some very talented British science fiction writers who are women who cannot get contracts to write science fiction novels. Publishers are perfectly happy to give them contracts for fantasy, but for some reason women aren't supposed to write hard science fiction because it doesn't sell. Help, I got girl cooties on my reading matter. This is contemptible. It's disgraceful. And unfortunately, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. If a publisher's won't publish it, market it effectively, and push it, it won't sell. If the booksellers won't push it, it won't sell. Because it won't sell, they won't push it. Someone has to actually get in and break that loop somehow. I'm not sure how. I could hope that sooner or later the self-publishing boom will make it irrelevant by demonstrating the worth of some of this work. But in the meantime, it's just harder for some types of people to get visible. As a result, some sections of science fiction are very much a white male middle-class club, and I don't think that's a good thing at all. When I see my name on a shortlist for the Hugo Award, I want to know that I'm there because I wrote something that deserves to be there, not because of the colour of my skin or my gender.
So, Bruce Sterling, and who was the other author you recommended?
Carl Schrader. Schroeder.
You were speaking about, you mentioned Moore's Law. Moore's Law and Kumi's Law still seem to hold, for now. Although Horizon appears to be approaching pretty fast, do you agree?
Actually, there was a piece of news I ran across today that suggests Moore's Law may have broken in one sector. SanDisk are now shipping flash memory at a new capacity level, but they haven't increased their node size. That is the number of circuit elements per nanometer.
We're living in historical times.
Yep, they failed to actually get down to a smaller scale of the area survey instead, to keep pace with the size of the memory they needed to sell. This only came out in the past week or so.
My next question is going to be, do you see it being broken in any near future? Well, we're there. Is there a future in reversible computing, do you think?
Well, hang on. I think Moore's Law will reassert itself a bit. This is a temporary obstacle. It's basically down to SanDisk having been unable to improve the performance of the system as fast as they wanted to.
I agree.
They'll get over it eventually, but it implies things are beginning to slow down. In the long term, I think we've got a lot more headway, a lot more room to go, without having to get into exotica like reversible computing.
You think it's exotic? It's not going to have any relevance in the next 10 years?
I don't think we'll see it in the next 10 years, maybe beyond that. What we are seeing is Intel got religious about 5 years ago about cutting power consumption. Around 2003, 2004, they were selling new and faster microprocessors that ran so hot you could fry an egg on them. When your microprocessor is kicking out 84 watts of electricity, of heat when it runs, if you put that on a laptop, you'll have third-degree burns. They suddenly realized that this was not going to work. Sales of ARM, a competing architecture, were rising rapidly, and they're not very fast, but a low power chip. And it was eating Intel's market at the low end, so Intel suddenly got religion about reducing power consumption.
I understand Wi-Fi is also quite energy inefficient, and it won't hold in the long run because it's just eating up too much energy. Probably.
There have been studies of very high efficiency radio networking. They are relatively low bit rate. You're talking tens of kilobytes per second rather than tens of megabytes per second. But instead of taking milliwatts or whole watts of electricity to pump out stuff, you're taking nanowatts, ridiculously small amounts of electricity. Enough that you can envisage a microprocessor about 4 square millimeters. It's about as powerful as the processor in today's iPhone. This is in 10 years' time. But would actually be solar powered, including its radio inputs and outputs, so that it could actually run off ambient sunlight or at night street lights. And the interesting thing is, even when we can't make our circuits any more powerful or small, they will continue to get cheaper for a long time because the semiconductor fab lines will be amortized, they'll be churning them out. So at some point in about the next 20 years, our chips are going to stop getting more powerful. Instead, they're going to get cheaper and lower power consumption, until it reaches a point where we could reasonably afford to instrument our cities with one semiconductor chip per square metre, 4 of those carpet tiles, for about the cost that a city currently pays for scraping chewing gum off sidewalks. And that leads to whole interesting questions. When computing power is so cheap you can drop microprocessors every square metre, what do we do with them? What are the opportunities? What can we achieve?
If you haven't read Accelerando, pick it up downstairs. It certainly discusses some of the some of what you just said, doesn't it?
Yeah. I mean, what does it mean when a city becomes intelligent around us or responsive to our needs? As an example, we've heard of Google's self-driving cars. My take is that eventually self-driving cars will become the norm because the insurance companies won't insure human drivers. 90% of traffic accidents have resulted of a driver doing something stupid. So when the self-driving cars become better on average than human driving cars, our insurance premiums will begin to rise. Now, look a bit further down the line. What are the implications when all cars are self-driving? Never mind unemployed truck drivers and taxi drivers. We're not going to need most street signs because you'll be carrying around a smartphone with GPS on it. Your car will know where it's meant to be taking you. The signs will still be there, the maps will be there, but they'll be unreadable. Not designed to be read by human eyeballs at ground level. A lot of the road markings are going to go. You're not going to need separate sidewalks to separate pedestrians and bicycle riders from the traffic anymore, because the traffic is going to consist of inhumanly well-driven vehicles that are responsive to obstacles. Your microprocessor every meter is going to be keeping an eye open for a child running into the road following a ball and notifying oncoming cars 100 meters down the road to slow down or dodge. One of the things this is going to result in is an end to almost all road traffic deaths. I mean, the carnage on our roads worldwide, 2 million people a year die or are maimed on roads around the world. Not so much in Europe or the United States, but in the developing world, it's horrible. It's not on the same level of death toll as the Second World War, but it's somewhere between the Congo Wars and the First World War. And one side effect of the end of Moore's Law is that is slowly going to go away.
Let's hope. More often than not, you are labeled a Scottish writer. Headread festival advertises you as one. Do you feel like one?
Well, I've lived in Scotland long enough, nearly 20 years, that when I write Scottish police procedurals, my American editors and agents ask me to tone down the Scots language usage so that their American readers can understand what they're reading. But I'm really Scottish insofar as I live there rather than being of Scottish descent. I'm not sure whether to say it's as significant or an uneasy thing as being, say, a Russian speaker living in Estonia. There's no language gap, for one thing, but I'm sort of vaguely conscious of being settled within Scotland.
Also, it's not a bad thing to be lumped together with Ian Banks, Ken MacLeod.
No. Or that well-known Scottish science fiction writer, Hannu Rajaniemi.
Hannu Rajaniemi is Scottish.
He lives in Edinburgh.
Okay, then it is.
We workshop together. So, if I'm a Scottish science fiction writer, so is he.
You learn something every day. You've written in your blog about possibilities of Scottish independence in the near future. It hasn't sort of happened yet, but do you see it happening?
There is a formal referendum, a vote on it, due in September next year. I'm not going to stick my neck out and say what I think will happen, or indeed discuss whether it should or should not happen here, though, if you don't mind, because I could bore my audience for hours with Scottish politics. This isn't really interesting to you, is it?
Well, I quite enjoyed Holding State, which talks about these matters a bit. Missile Gap, you wrote Missile Gap in...
2003, I think? 2004?
Less than 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Do you yourself know for sure who done it? Which one of the ideas in the story was actually...
Missile Gap is actually a bit of a puzzle box, but there is this thing doing the rounds in science fictional circles and philosophical circles called the simulation hypothesis. A philosopher at Cambridge called Nick Bostrom came up with it.
We've all seen Matrix.
Yeah, we've all seen The Matrix. The idea is we're living in a simulation. More to the point, there can only be one origin of intelligent life in the universe, but it is likely to spread fairly rapidly thereafter, go interstellar, and persist for a very, very long time. If intelligent life persists or occurs in the universe for a very long time, sooner or later someone will start running simulations of what it was like to be that first ancestral civilization. So there can only be one first time out the box, but more than one simulation, many more than one. So we're most probably living in a simulation, in the Matrix, according to this hypothesis. Now, Missile Gap is to some extent an argument against this. It points out that we might not be that original ancestral civilization. Just because we haven't seen any other extraterrestrial intelligences doesn't mean that we're the first, or even our type of life is the first. Actually, in Missile Gap, it's in a universe where the true origin of persistent intelligent life in the cosmos is with eusocial organisms, more like termites or ants than like us, grouped into hive intelligences. We're just an irritating anthill in their ancestor simulation.
Thank you. More and more reality, especially in the UK, is absorbed via cameras and screens. And there's a lot of CCTV that's just, nobody's watching it, but it's still there, these recordings. Do you foresee a day when most of us will be more informed through such and similar proxy technologies than directly with eyes, organic sensorial?
I'm not sure. I mean, one argument about the singularity is we're now approaching the photographic singularity. It turns out that roughly 10% of all photographs ever taken were taken in the past year. 30% of these photographs are now on Facebook. Yeah. The rate at which we're taking photographs is going up exponentially as everybody acquires cameras. In addition, Facebook doesn't just accept these photographs and host them out of the goodness of their soul. They're doing it for advertising purposes. They have clusters of hundreds of thousands of computers running face recognition algorithms on your photos and on your Facebook friends list, trying to work out who is who in every photo. Most of these photos from smartphones or high-end cameras are now tagged with their GPS coordinates and time, so they can actually identify who was where and when. This data is going to be persistent, it's going to be sticky, it's going to be around for a very long time, and there's more of it all the time. The whole Google Glass thing, the whole life logging thing, for any number of people who will need life logging, think, for example, in terms of teachers who may wish to either keep an eye on what's going on at the back of a classroom, or who don't want to be accused of molesting or mishandling pupils. Yeah? This is professional responsibility. Police officers who either want to record evidence of crimes or interviews, or don't want to be accused of beating up a suspect. There's any number of reasons people might want to run a life log, and these too will be indexed and cross-referenced in time. Now, I don't know if we'll be mediating our interactions through these. We are, after all, sitting here face to face. I'm not giving this presentation on a screen via a Skype.
But it will be on the web in a few weeks, I think.
Yeah. I mean, we could do it the Skype way, but that's no fun. I don't see this stuff as subverting human contact. What it does mean, though, is the human contact is going to be informed. To give you an analogy, a friend of mine was at university with Bill Clinton, and other people I've met have known Bill Clinton, and he was apparently legendary for his ability to meet somebody, be told their name just once, ask them a couple of questions, and 3 years later greet them by name and ask them how they were doing in their job. And we're not talking famous politicians or people who were supposed to know, just random people in a queue of hundreds he was meeting.
So it sounds like a mnemonic technique.
Yeah. Now imagine what it would be like if, thanks to your Google Glass or equivalent, you've got the same ability, as in whenever you see somebody in front of you, it reminds you of when you met them and where, and any notes you attached. I have a real problem because I can never remember anybody's name at first meeting or even third or fourth meeting. I just about got Mart's name down now. It'd be very, very useful to me, for example, just to have this prompt as to who people are. So that's what I mean by informing our interactions.
Bruce Sterling claimed that... Have you worn Google Glass?
I've played with one, I haven't actually used one.
Bruce claimed that you can't really read anything on it, that it's just pictures and video.
Yeah, he may be correct, but I suspect reading applications will come along fairly rapidly as Google open up the APIs. I will caution. On the one hand, I consider Bruce Sterling to be a national treasure of science fiction. He's an object of emulation. He's very, very brilliant, but he is sometimes wrong. For example, he declared blogging dead in 2002. Right. That was about when I began blogging seriously. It was possibly dead to him, you know. He always gets to a new field 10 years before everybody else. He was totally bored with global climate change in 1998. He'd written the novel, he'd run the social pressure movement, you know. It's taken for granted now, we can just move on. I think he forgets just how far ahead of everybody else he lives. So that's why I say I think he's dismissing Google Glass a bit too fast.
Thank you. I'm sure you have some questions. If anybody needs me to translate them into English, I'll be happy to.
I have a question. You mentioned singularity. I have a question. You mentioned singularity a few times. You've written novels about it. What do you really think about it really happening and the predictions of people who write about seriously, like Brian Kurzweil?
Actually, my opinions on it change daily, but I was just reminding myself of a blog essay I wrote with 3 arguments against the singularity a while ago. And the short version is, there ain't no Father Christmas. The tooth fairy's a lie as well. I can't rule out the singularity. You can't prove that it won't happen, but there are several reasons for being kind of a little bit worried about the hype surrounding it. Firstly, the misapprehensions surrounding the possibility of a really transcendent artificial intelligence being possible. Well, we have such a tenuous grip on what constitutes human consciousness or intelligence to begin with, that knowing how to get to an artificial one is trying to build an intercontinental airliner before you've got the steam engine, in effect. Next issue, looking at the pattern of beliefs of many of the people who believe in the singularity and the transhumanists, I can't help being very, very worried by a nagging sensation that I've seen before. Most of these beliefs have antecedents in Christian eschatology, going back centuries.
There's even a few movements on the web, Christian transhumanist movements.
Yeah.
It totally exists.
Yeah, I would not be surprised to see a Christian fundamentalist transhumanist movement eating most of the extropians' brains in the next couple of decades, simply because a lot of their ideas, I think there are certain very, very powerful ideas buried deep in Western culture that keep resurfacing in the brains of people who consider themselves to be perfectly rational atheists, and they keep reinventing Christianity. Quite why this happens, well, look at how thoroughly and how well Christianity spread after its invention. It's a very infectious set of ideas. It's no surprise that it recolonizes sterilized ground. So, no, I can't state with any certainty that the singularity isn't going to happen, but I would be very, very wary in any assessment of it.
Kas kellelgi on veel küsimusi?
Do you think that handwriting will become obsolete? Do you think that handwriting will become obsolete in near future?
Ooh, that's a hard one. I'm seeing some arguments between educationalists in America at present over whether or not to stop teaching joined-up cursive handwriting, and it's possible that cursive handwriting will become obsolescent in the near future, but at least being able to do block writing, first thing we teach kids, which is a lot easier, albeit slower, I think it's going to be a cold day in hell before that dries up completely. For that to dry up, we'd also have to abandon pens and pencils, not only paper, but any type of device that has a pen input. I can't really see that happening. But yeah, I mean, cursive handwriting was used universally for note-taking and for writing for readers before the invention of the typewriter. It still has taken well over 100 years to die.
Thank you.
Personally, I feel a little bit concerned that there were no hardware upgrades to human mind for quite a while. We're really buggy and we're quite irrational, full of cognitive biases. And as a futurist, with some, as I can see, with some ability to predict approximately and rationally what's going to happen to us when the computerized intelligence reaches, I mean, even now I see that we are not able to process all the information that comes in, and that's why people get distracted and end up looking at kittens, because just their own RAM is not powerful enough. And there seems to be no increase and even no demand for upgrading your hardware or your software or running your mind more efficiently. So
I disagree.
Oh, there we go. That was what I wanted.
Firstly, the fact that you're asking this question is a very positive sign that some people want such upgrades. You mentioned cognitive biases. That's a fairly important mean to actually have at your brain's fingertips, because it means you're at least aware of the existence of such things and able to compensate them to some extent. We are developing a lot of interesting insights in cognitive psychology that are actually coming out of new tools for dealing with neurobiology. Just the fact that we can put somebody in an MRI scanner and look at what areas of their brain lights up when we make them do problems or ask them questions is giving us huge breakthrough capabilities in psychology that weren't available before. Now, these may not be sort of a chip with wires into our brains, but they can be just as powerful in letting us understand what we're doing or use our minds more efficiently.
So you're predicting an app that will minimize your cognitive biases?
I'm not even sure about that. It's just ways of thinking about things. The problem is most people are lazy thinkers. Moreover, human beings are the least intelligent species to evolve that can support. No, we've evolved to the lowest level of intelligence that can support a tool-using technological civilization. Because intelligence isn't distributed evenly, we have outliers. The outliers make progress, and everybody else in the middle of the bell curve, the average, pick up these tools and use them. We didn't need to evolve to be individually any smarter than we are, because language allows us to horizontally exchange ideas. So this is part of the issue. Most people don't know or don't want ways of thinking more efficiently, but then they don't need to. They can wait until somebody else comes up with an idea and teaches it to their children in kindergarten.
Like Hitler. You know, somebody you can really trust, like Hitler.
Yeah, that is a bit of a worry.
You mentioned a couple of times a contract to write the science fiction novel. How does the thing work? You first need a contract to write, and what does the contract say about the essence of science fiction? Who says is it science fiction enough? Or
I don't need a contract to write. What I need a contract for is to get money out of a publisher before I write the book. What happens is I generate a few ideas for novels that I'd like to write, not just one at a time because publishers always want to buy free. But I come up with these ideas, I discuss them with my agent, who's basically my business manager, and we prioritise how badly I want to write them and also how commercial they are. And then we take the 3 or 4 ideas that are most commercial and most urgent. You know, I want to write them and they're probably going to sell. Go to a publisher, and the publisher decides whether they're willing to pay for them. And at that point, we start discussing things in a contract. And the main point of the contract is, on the one hand, they pay me money, and it sets out how much money they pay and when, including a loan in advance of the retail sales. On the other hand, it also says in what order I will write the books and when. But the books that I write, the books in the contract are ones that I have suggested. So it's an intricate contract negotiation, but I basically come up with some proposals of things I'd like to write, and then we haggle over the details and draw up a contract. The only disadvantage this has is if I get a couple of years on from the contract and think, what was I thinking? I can't possibly write that, but there's another book over there, let's go write that instead. But, you know, this is over a period of many years. I have a good working relationship with my publishers, and in general, last time I did this, my editor just said, look, you just go and write what you want to write, because what I've found is that the books you write because you want to write them are usually better than the ones you write just because it says so on a piece of paper.
How many years did it take? How many years did it take for them to understand that?
I think we went through about a 5-year period of multiple contracts, and then finally there was Halting State, which was just such a ridiculous, different novel proposal that my British publisher declined to actually buy it until they saw the finished product. The Americans said, yeah, we'll take this on one condition. It's part of a 2-book contract, and the other book is a space opera because we know it'll sell. So they can make up the loss. You know, big vote of confidence. And I handed it in and they read it and, ooh, this is better than we expected. So the British publisher came back and actually made an offer and bought it. And the American publisher printed more copies than they thought they would normally sell for one of my books, and then they ran out a week before it reached the bookshops and had to reprint twice in the first month. Since that happened, they realised, okay, let Charlie do what he wants to do, it might make us more money that way.
And you've got some more creative control.
Yeah, I mean, that's largely why I do the writing of novels. A novelist doesn't have total creative control. For one thing, there are quite a few novels I could write that just aren't really going to make any money, and I'm doing this as a full-time job now. I have to be able to eat. So, I'm sorry, but a couple of the novel ideas I have to put on the back shelf for later. If I win the lottery and make a couple of million euros, then maybe I'll write them without any aim of making a lot of money, but for the time being, they're not commercially viable. Again, anything I write goes past an editor, actually a couple of editors, so I'm not the only person involved in making a book, but on the other hand, I'm the main creative input. They don't come to me saying, we want a book about talking space squid. I'm the guy who suggests that. And there's very few art forms in which you can do that anymore. Poetry, yes, but how many poets do you know who do it for a living? Playwrights, well, they've got to talk to actors and theatre managers and stage directors. Cinema, film, TV is even worse. Music, it's almost all dealt with by bands these days. There are solo musicians out there, but not so many. So yeah, one of the big things I like about it is simply the creative control I've got over the finished product.
Everything but the covers.
We have time to field one more question, I think.
Okay. So you mentioned extraterrestrials earlier, and I have a rather weird question. Are you familiar with the ancient alien theory? The ancient alien theory.
Ancient aliens.
Yeah.
What? That they came and taught people how to build pyramids? And
Well, not exactly. Like they're the missing link, or I mean, what's your opinion on it?
It looks mostly to be junk. Entertaining junk that was very creative in its time and made the authors of those books like Eric von Daniken a lot of money, but probably junk. Ancient Aliens gets us instantly into the Fermi paradox. Enrico Fermi, the Italian physicist, was sitting at a table at Los Alamos in 1945, I think, having a discussion with some physicists, and somebody proposed that there was alien life out there. And Fermi thought for a few minutes and then said, if they're out there, why aren't they here? Once you have interplanetary or intertravel, colonizing the entire galaxy, even with the technology we have today, could in theory be done in less than 100 million years. The galaxy, however, is 4,000 million years older than our solar system. So either we are the first intelligent life to get this idea, or intelligent life has evolved multiple times and nobody has come calling. This seems vanishingly improbable. So the issue of ancient astronauts is we'd be seeing large-scale signs of them everywhere. They wouldn't have visited once and gone away, they'd be all over the place. Mars would be a different colour.
But still, you wrote Missile Gap, which is sort of an ancient aliens story.
Or rather, we're the ancient forerunner aliens, we're the extinct one that's been resurrected as part of a lab experiment. We're not even the target of the experiment.
We're going to have to continue this conversation on Sunday at 3 o'clock kirjanike maja Mustalaega saalis. Tulge kohale, mõelge rohkem küsimusi välja, mul hakkavad nüüd otsa saama, te küsisite juba ära palju asju. See you on Sunday.